So the month of live streams that December seems to have become continues. We've got another special guest, kind of returning the favor. I was on Greg Wycliffe's show. I guess it was last week. Feels longer ago. I've been so busy lately. Now we're having him on Don't Talk TV. So I think we're going to have an interesting chat, maybe continuing some of the themes that we had when I was on his show, talking about the hate crime laws we've got in Canada. And if you missed us, if you tuned in at 8 o'clock, you're watching the replay. Sorry about that, but just some real life stuff happened with me. So I couldn't stay as late as I have been staying. So nevertheless, if you're joining us live or joining us on the replay, thank you for joining us. And I think you're going to enjoy this one. Hello, my name is Nicholas Wansbutter. I'm a lawyer in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, and welcome to Don't Talk TV, and welcome to Greg Wycliffe to Don't Talk TV. Greg, thanks for joining us.
So, thanks so much for having me.
I'm going to get you to tell us a bit about you. I mean, I know you're kind of an alternate media personality, journalist, comedian. We might get into a little bit of your stuff, but I know a lot of your viewers are probably going to be watching on your stream, but for Don't Talk TV viewers, could you just give us a quick little synopsis of who you are and what you're about?
Sure. I'm a Canadian. My name's Greg. I grew up in Canada, went to university for media studies, went to college for radio broadcasting, worked in radio a little bit, worked in video production a little bit, got involved in politics, ran for the PPC, got smeared as racist, horrible experience, started to create YouTube content to counteract this misinformation and these smear campaigns. COVID happened after that 2019 election, continued to make content. Ended up, people started to call me a comedian because of some of my short, angsty sort of expressions of the absurdity of lockdowns and that sort of thing. Went to the trucker convoy and started to interview people there, posted online. People started to call me a journalist as well. So now I do content creation, and my most recent endeavor is savefreespeech.ca, which is educating people on Bill C-63 and other speech laws in Canada, and also exposing the sort of smear merchants in Canada and how they operate. Because even with Trudeau out, there's going to be a lot of this like managerial class people in these institutions who systematically censor and smear people they don't like or who have the wrong politics. But thank you so much for having me on, Mr. Wansbutter. And you being a lawyer, having experience with this, exactly where the line is when it comes to free speech in Canada is certainly what I'm interested in, want to learn more about, so I can navigate the murky waters of Canada in 2024.
Well, you and me both, because even as a lawyer, I'm not even totally sure where the line is. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit. But I mean, part of the problem is the reason why the line is so unclear is for something that I've been hammering for years on this channel. It seems like every second episode I'm complaining about this, is the unequal application of the law or selective enforcement. So that's why it's so unclear, because you'll see stuff that you would think might be a hate crime said by one person, and it's not considered a hate crime because of who they are. And then you see something that you think might be innocuous said by another person, and that is considered a hate crime. And I think it's because of who they are. So maybe we'll get into that a little bit. But what riding did you run in for the PPC?
I was in Parkdale High Park, which is
right in the belly of the beast.
Right in the belly of the beast. Man, I got stories if you want to hear them. I mean, I had a 18-year-old. So for those who don't know, it's on one end of the riding, you have very affluent people who are champagne socialists. They're very well off, and they unironically want to pay more taxes to help the poors or the poor people. And at the other end of the riding, you have Parkdale, which is a more lower income area, and they want socialism. They want that because it's because they're down on their luck, obviously. And so it's a red and orange war zone between the NDP and the Liberals. And I figured, you know what, I'll run just to kind of platform the PPC ideas and to let people know that there's like an alternative out there. But really quick, the greatest hits were I had an 18-year-old volunteer. He spoke fluent Polish, by the way, and we were going through a neighborhood knocking on doors. And I turn around and there's this grown man yelling at this guy, yelling at this 18-year-old kid volunteer. And he's like, racist, racist, get out of here, racist. His voice is like echoing off. Like this is like a subdivision, like, you know, suburb street. And I had to go up to him to be like, do you mind, sir? Like, he's a volunteer. He's 18. Did you want to talk about something? But this person was just totally hostile, and they kind of like backed away into their house. But that's when I realized that you know, propaganda, and misinformation, and like, you know, a slight smear of like, oh well, the PPC might have associations with, you know, the far right, or they might have that snowballs and manifests as something very, very ugly in the real world and in the social life of Canada. Yeah, you know, I had grannies who were like, oh, you're a young man, you're running for politics, that's great, who are you running for? I'd say the PPC, and she would literally treat me like I had 5 heads, like, get the hell out of here, you ruined my day. Like the reactions of people is actually like hostile, like they're possessed or something. It's very disturbing. I had a volunteer who was of Indian heritage. He had vegetables thrown at him. I went to a debate, the environment debate, actually 2 debates, where the Communist Party did this huge demonstration to protest me being there. So it was really a trial by fire into the world of politics, because I was like, hey, I'm gonna represent, you know, the PPC, and we, you know, we should stop the carbon tax, we should defund the CBC, and you know, we should stop mass immigration. That was really not popular at the time. But
yeah. Whereas now people would probably be saying, you can count on my vote if you talk about stopping immigration, except for the fact that the Liberals are already on that boat now, more so than the Conservatives. I mean, I don't know. I guess the Conservatives are maybe, I don't know. I don't follow this stuff enough. It's all kind of puppet theater to me. Has Pierre Poilievre read the polls and revised his positions?
He's going to be in power next, so he wants to pander to the newcomers, as far as I can tell. I post clips all the time. I made a compilation of like, here is Pierre Poilievre supporting immigration or stopping deportations for 3 minutes. All these clips are within the last 2 years.
I played that on an episode of Don't Talk TV, actually, not too long ago.
And, you know, I don't even know if these people are real or not, if they're bots, or if they're just like paid Conservative Party shills, but they're like, no, he supports it. And it's like, where's the clip? Like, you can't even find one clip of this guy opposing mass immigration. Like, if he ever says it, he says it's a broken immigration system and we're going to fix it. Long story short, like, Pierre Poilievre will not make a clear statement of opposing mass immigration. Like, he just won't do it. Yet he'll say things like, we need to give more firearms to the Ukraine. We support Israel in bombing Iran. So he'll make bold statements on foreign conflicts, but will not even say what the majority of Canadians now want, which is to stop mass immigration. It's absolutely feckless and pathetic. But I warn you, like, if we get on this topic, then you know, like,
we're both going to go to jail. No.
Well, it's more just, don't get me started.
No, we could probably talk about,
although I would like to bring up with you that one of they want to do their own version of the Online Harms Act, and we can talk about that a bit later. But
yeah, well, I was going to say, I mean, in kind of a weird way, that election experience of yours, I mean, on one hand, I'm sure it was probably very stressful, but in a way, it almost sounds kind of like hilariously fun to be going out and just seeing like how outrageous and insane are people going to be today as I walk around.
Oh man, you know, I think of it that way now, but at the time I was like a baby, I was a toddler, I was a little innocent sheep to politics, so I was not thinking about it that way at the time. Right. I was just kind of pushing through because I was in campaign mode. But even like after the election, you know, I don't want to sound like a little baby victim, but like it was traumatic. It's traumatic to have a room full of 300 people in a church at a debate, like thinking you're the evil bad man. Like, that's not a fun experience for any human being. Just like psychologically, our nervous system is like, it's not a good time.
I'm sure it's not. And I'm hearing it sounds like that was maybe a little bit earlier in your journey, if you will, down this rabbit hole. So
Definitely.
that would be even more. That would, I mean, to the average Canadian, what some people might call "quote unquote" a normie, yeah, like walking into that would be like a punch right in the face. Whereas when
Yeah.
you've kind of been around that stuff for a while and you see it, maybe you can approach it from a different way.
Yeah. So, I was a media nerd. Like, as I said, I went to media studies in school, so I knew all about, like, the first small red pill for me was Trudeau getting elected, and just kind of seeing how the propaganda was working in that 2015 election campaign, because I thought, like, this guy's really unqualified for the job. And I was just seeing Stephen Harper get demonized in such a like radical way. It was just like, wow. But on the other hand, the next red pill was that's when I started to follow politics with Justin Trudeau, because I thought it was very interesting. And then it was the Faith Goldie campaign for Toronto mayor, where I saw major parts of like the mass media institution totally fail. And I learned all about this in school, of how important the CRTC rules are. And these are the rules that dictate, mass media like TV and radio. And in college for radio, it got drilled into me: if you break the CRTC rules, you're dead. You're like, you cannot do that. And then I was working in radio selling advertising, and there's very specific CRTC rules for advertising during election campaigns. And my boss was like, if you break these rules, you're dead. Don't break the rules. And then during the election campaign for Faith Goldie, love her or hate her, she was the only person talking about the rising crime rates in the rising, like, gun crime rates in Toronto. And then Bell Media said, we're not going to play your ads, and gave her money back. This is like $20,000 in ad money on AM 1010, I believe, was the radio platform. And not only did I see this happen, where they're essentially breaking the rules, after that, Nicholas, no one cared. Like, no one was talking. So I just felt insane. I'm this media nerd seeing this happen, and I'm like, duh, what? Like, you're not allowed to do that. I was told that by, people who work in radio. I was told that by the radio college that I went to, one of the best in the country. Shouts out to Fanshawe College. I know that maybe Fanshawe College doesn't want me to associate with them, but too bad. But yeah. And then on top of that, the other kind of thing that added insult to injury, I guess, was the CBC, the public broadcaster. I was told in university that this broadcaster is there to make sure that we uphold a mass media conversation, fair conversation during an election, so we can have a healthy democracy. And then during this Toronto mayoral campaign, CBC posted this weird article that was more like a press release, or this weird like public relations thing. And they're like, we are CBC. We love democracy. We love doing debates for the Toronto mayoral debate, but we're not doing one this year. And like, they didn't really give a reason why they weren't doing one. And then so I saw the private institution fail. I saw CRTC fail, and I saw the CBC fail. So to me, it was honestly a very kind of, I had this, like, I thought of like my grandfather who fought in World War II, believe it or not. And it was like this weird sort of like, is this like my fight? Because I'm not going to be able to ignore this. This is like clear cracks in our democracy. And if these CRTC rules don't mean anything, and large corporations like Bell Media can just evade them if they want to, then what the does any of these rules mean? So,
Right. Yeah. Well, and I'm just going to highlight a comment that came in when we were talking about that, saying, real issues must be discussed and backed by numbers and facts. I agree in principle, but what you've just been talking about for the last couple of minutes is exactly what the legacy media is not doing. I mean, how often do you hear facts and numbers, like actual facts and real issues? No, it's always these, these platitudes are like, oh, he's racist. Like, well, really, who cares if is the PPC racist or not? And wait, who cares? Are they right or not? Or are they're presenting facts? Are those facts correct or not? I notice, that we're gonna get to the hate crime stuff, but seems like the hate crime stuff, you never hear them say that they're lying or they're wrong. They just say, oh, they're a hater, they're racist or whatever, because they can't argue the actual facts or numbers.
Yeah, no, it's so annoying. It's so annoying. You make a really good point there, though, that with sort of the Trudeau reign of 10 years, his politics has I don't think a lot of conservatives really appreciate how much his politics and his moral lens, his liberal moral lens, has totally infected the entire country. So now, like you said, it's is there horrible crime happening? Is there horrible homelessness? Is there horrible like death and destruction that we're enabling overseas? It's like, whoa, hold on. Are you racist and sexist? Because that's actually what's most important. If you said something that's offensive or something like that, that's literally the prevailing sort of I don't know, barometer. Like that's the most important like indicator for anything now. And it pains me so much to see right wingers or conservative leaders prescribe to that. They're like, well, actually, we need to make sure if we're racist or sexist or not. That's the most important thing for us. And it's like you need to throw out that completely and create a new moral paradigm.
Yeah.
I'm so tired of being stuck in this Justin Trudeau moral paradigm. And anytime I see a conservative prescribe to it or say, no, the media is going to do this to us, and it's like we're already losing. We're already giving in to the Trudeau politics, or like the woke, as people like to say. Yet they somehow still justify catering to it and submitting to it. Most importantly, which is really, it's just
Right.
it's not even a losing battle. It's like it's us admitting defeat in a way. It's like it's
It is. It's absolutely.
yeah.
It's surrendering that ground to them. But I
Mhm.
just wanted this highlight was this comment was highlighted while we were talking. I wanted to actually respond to this from Edgy DTV. Thanks for watching. I've noticed your comments on a lot of my videos, so thanks for watching. So, Aston, do you have any opinions on the late and great Canadian lawyer Doug Christie? Could you be the next great free speech defense lawyer? Well, interesting little anecdote. My mom actually grew up down the street from Doug Christie, and I remember her
Wow.
telling me when I was much younger that she thought he was really weird because as a teenager or something, he'd walk around in the neighborhood with either a Canadian flag, which at that time was the red ensign, or a British Union Jack, which back then was actually technically the official flag of Canada. Um, I mean, I don't know. To me, that just sounds patriotic, and I mean, young men love flags. Like, well, what's wrong with that? But I mean, I never met him. I don't know him personally, but I think he did good work fighting for against these laws that really stifle not just free speech, it stifles discussion of
Mm.
issues. Like there's certain topics that you're just not allowed to discuss. And terms like the science is settled, but even non-science type of things, right? There's historical issues you're not allowed to discuss. There's one defined uh, explanation. I mean, that's not history or science. That's religious dogma, in my view. I mean, because that's how religious dogma works, where it's clearly defined. In Catholicism, for example, the Pope will formally define a dogma, and now if you're Catholic, you have to believe that. There's no difference. Which, okay, in a religion, that's fine, but that's not how history and science work.
So could you give us a quick rundown lesson of Doug Christie and why he is like a famous pro free speech lawyer?
Well, I think Doug Christie is probably best known because he defended, uh, so like the big names like Ernst Zundel. That's probably his most famous one. Paul Fromm would be another big one. I mean, Ernst Zundel, that was one of the first times that these hate crime laws got really put to the test. So Ernst Zundel, I haven't read up on him recently, so I'm just trying to go off memory, and people can correct me in the comments box if I'm wrong. But Ernst Zundel, he was someone who wrote a lot of pamphlets, and I think he wrote some books as well, where he was calling into question the official narrative of what's, I guess, popular referred to as the Holocaust. Um,
Holocaust. I don't know if I've heard of that. Wait,
yeah,
what is
I
that?
mean, I hesitate. The only reason I hesitate in using the word Holocaust is because, from a religious perspective, that actually has a very specific meaning um, of a religious offering to God. So, putting on my hat as a Catholic person, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the use of that term for anything other than like crucifixion of God, but which would be the only. Anyway, before we get that, we're probably getting a bit off topic there, but we'll use the Holocaust because that's what everyone knows it as. The Shoah, it's also called. So I know he did. He issued one of his pamphlets was "Did 6 million really die?" So of course, for asking that question, he was accused of hate crime. Now, of course, it would be open and closed case now because now it's specifically defined. You cannot question any aspect of the official Holocaust narrative. Although I think, as we discussed on your show, and I've said on my own video, the trouble I have is I don't even know what the how much of the official narrative, what are you allowed to question, what aren't you, because they don't define what exactly that is. But I imagine, I think it's safe to say that the number 6 million is part of that. You can't question that, and certainly he couldn't. So he was brought to court. Doug Christie, I mean, it got appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. And I think the reason the Zundel case is so well known is because he was actually acquitted because he was able to raise a reasonable doubt that some of his arguments were true. He brought in this guy, Fred Loyster, who was an expert in gas chambers and for the United States government, gas chambers for executing people. And he testified before the Supreme Court and other lower courts, like, look, like, I've examined certain doors or things, and he was of the view that you couldn't actually exterminate all these people the way it said. So anyway, he got acquitted. It's been years since I read the Supreme Court decision, but it was an interesting one because the Supreme Court of the time, their decision was essentially, we find his views extremely odious and distasteful. However, we're forced to say that he should be acquitted because this is how the law is written, and he has brought this evidence, and we think that this is, quackery, but it raises a reasonable doubt. I paraphrase, of course, but I think that's probably the big one. Why Doug Christie is well known. I mean, far from the only case that he did. He did.
I have all these pamphlets about how the Holodomor didn't happen. I've been handing those out with no problem. Haven't had any troubles. I'm just kidding. My point is like, if you were to downplay, what's the terminology? I have it right here. Willful promotion of anti-Semitism. Everyone who, by communicating statements other than in private conversation, willfully promotes anti-Semitism by condoning, denying, or downplaying. Those are the three. What are those terms? But you could probably condone, deny, or downplay the Holodomor or the Armenian genocide in various ways. And, I'm sure there wouldn't be as much heat for doing that, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, the Holodomor is interesting. I would say before Russia invaded the Ukraine, you could question it as much as you want. Now that Russia's invaded Ukraine and it's part of the current thing? Maybe you'd get in more trouble for that. I don't know. It's an interesting question. I mean, and I don't know. Maybe people do question it. I mean, most people just don't even know about it. I'd say that's the number one thing is the average person. They just have no idea that this even happened.
It's interesting to think, some of those guys, you may have saw this in Hamilton recently. They had like the black bloc and they had a mass deportation sign. It's interesting to think how they would have been treated 5 years ago doing that. Because, because the climate has changed, and I feel like you're kind of like alluding to this, how unfortunately in our fair justice system and totally cool and totally real democracy, depending on the political climate, you might have these certain speech laws enforced more against you, depending on, depending on what time it is, depending on what season it is, but depending on the trends of what is in and what is not in. Would you say that's fair to say?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the evidence on the ground backs you up on that. Is that it seems to be, since the law is it's vaguely worded, so it leaves it open to this vague interpretation, and and I mean, also depends on what people are going to complain to the police about as well, right? So that will also, I think, hot topics will make it more likely for people to complain to the police, but I think it might also make it more likely for the police to lay charges. Now, I haven't crunched actual numbers, so I hedge that a bit of saying that I haven't actually looked into it, but I think, whenever I point out instances of anti-Christian hatred, like burning down churches or tearing down monuments, vandalizing churches, running up to people yelling, "I hate white people," and punching them in the face, and those don't result in hate crime charges, people say, "Oh, that you're just crazy. You live in this fantasy world where Christians are persecuted and they're not charged." But I mean, I think those are real instances, and I've never ever even heard of someone being charged for anti-Christian or anti-white hate crimes. It seems like it's only against certain groups that the law gets enforced, and that just, I mean, aside from maybe inherent problems with the law itself, that just completely undermines any kind of respect for the law by the fact that I think people can see, maybe they don't all internalize it, but people see that these laws are not being applied equally across the board. And it just brings the law into doubt by virtue of that fact.
Yeah, I mean, and the mainstream sort of, I would call it hatred, I guess. The mainstream like hatred towards white people is like, keyword is mainstream. Like there's a book called White Guilt, White Fragility.
Yeah, that one's...
Yeah, I imagine a book called like Jewish Guilt or Jewish Fragility or something like this. Like the White Fragility, totally mainstream, bestseller, New York Times bestseller. If you were to flip that script, it's like, not only would you not be a bestseller, like you'd probably get thrown in jail. You get thrown in a cellar. Like it's
you'd be charged anyway. I mean, whether you'd be convicted or not, it might depend on the facts, but that just raises another interesting point. It goes back a little bit to what Edgy DTV was asking about. Will I be the next? Could I be the next great free speech defense lawyer? I mean, I don't know. If people want to hire me, I'd be definitely very interested and highly motivated in doing those cases. But I haven't been hired in any of those cases, and unfortunately, the cases that I've seen, people have either tried representing themselves or they've hired lawyers that, I mean, I don't know the lawyers, so maybe they were excellent, but I don't think they were people that were necessarily thinking the same way, which you don't always need a lawyer who thinks the same way as you do. But on such a politically charged topic, it may be a benefit to have someone that is a little bit more on your side, if we could say it that way. Because the defenses I would run, I haven't seen run. Usually the defenses are, they just completely surrender the ground that it is hate speech, and then they just argue, it wasn't me, I didn't mean the Jews, I meant someone else when I said the tribe or whatever. I've seen that defense. Or they try some sovereign citizen nonsense. So for example, I forget his first name, Patron, I'm not sure his last name is pronounced. The guy used to be the leader of the Nationalist Party of Canada. He went with a self-represented sovereign citizen defense, which predictably failed horribly, because contrary to what the sovereign citizens say on their websites, they never win in court. And actually, I used
court's not even real, man. I'm not even a real citizen, man. Well, it's a real jail cell, sir. It's a real charge.
Well, and Mr. Patron's in a real jail cell. But so he tried arguing this whole, like, I'm not subject to the law because I'm a sovereign citizen. So he never even tried fighting. He never even tried fighting what he said, even hate crime. Same with the Sohei Chaput case in Quebec. I mean, that guy went to jail for a couple years for writing articles. And again, his argument was, it wasn't me, essentially, rather than saying these articles aren't actually hate crimes. So I would be interested to see how would these cases do if it wasn't conceded that it's hate crime and they actually fought it out and said, no, look, here, like the definition of hate crime. I think you did a reaction video to my video where I looked through the definition. I mean, you've got to be saying some pretty bad stuff, like calling for genocide or just such vilification that it could be leading to people causing harm. So, I would love to try that argument myself. I just haven't been retained by anyone, and partly that's also because these people are in different places. Like I can't practice in Quebec because I'm licensed in Ontario. I could practice like there's reciprocity agreements, so all the Western provinces, Ontario and Nova Scotia, I can practice in all of those provinces because they all have agreements.
I got a couple questions for you. I want to ask you about if you've been following what's been happening in the UK with their online harms bill, I believe it's called. Have you been following that at all?
I haven't, so I'll let you run with that a bit.
No, I mean, I only know kind of like the broad brushstrokes of different instances of people getting arrested for being at protests or saying things or just quite mundane things that just allude to, opposing mass immigration or kind of, crying out what happened to this, young UK, three young K girls who got murdered by the offspring of a migrant. And it wasn't like calling for violence or anything. It was more like kind of complaining and just talking about it and opposing mass immigration. So, which is what they say the Online Harms Act in Canada will not do. It's like, we will not use this against people who have the wrong politics. And it's like, okay, well, a bill with almost the exact same name in the UK is doing precisely that.
Yeah.
And I wish more Canadians would take advantage of the fact that we can look at different countries in Europe to like see our future, and like, I don't see why we don't do that like all the time, because there's a lot of like very valuable pieces of information. For example, the mainstream Conservative Party, they say they're going to save you, and then they keep the tap on for mass immigration. Like you can count so many different European countries, but
well, you don't even need to look at other European countries. You just need to look at Canadian history to see. I mean, that the whole Conservative Party thing is people not infrequently. I mean, I don't actually outwardly support any political party. I mean, I just try to present facts, and I mean, I've had Maxime Bernier on the show twice, but that's because he's the only political party leader who's willing to come on my show. We've reached out to. Well, Richard can correct me if I'm wrong. I know for sure we've reached out to the Conservative Party of Canada and just crickets in response. I think we actually even reached out to the Liberal Party and, of course, like just no response. So it's not like I'm, just trying to pump up the PPC. I mean, hey, he's willing to come on the show and talk to me. But with respect to the Conservative Party, I mean, I am unrepentant or unapologetic and saying, look, like, I've seen this movie before. I'm old enough. I'll be 45 in like 3 weeks. I'm old enough that I've seen this happen a few times. Now, granted, it was the Progressive Conservative Party before that, but I mean, even Harper, I mean, granted, he looks amazingly good now compared to what we have, but really, how much did he change from the Chrétien years? I mean, frankly, Jean Chrétien looks amazing compared to the current Liberal Party. I mean, I'd take Jean Chrétien. If someone could say you could have Jean Chrétien back or stay with what you have, I'd say, yeah, hook me up with Jean Chrétien. And if he chokes out a protester, I'd be cool with that too.
So I got a question for you, and this is gonna be like a really like pop quiz here. This is really gonna quiz you on your knowledge of free speech in Canada. So first, one preliminary question. In the criminal code, we have 319. I guess it's just mostly 319, which is public incitement of hatred or willful promotion of hatred. These are, first question is, when did these come into law, these hate speech laws?
Okay, so I was able to research that quickly before the case. They've been around since 1970. So guess who brought them in the first place?
Pierre Elliott Trudeau.
Pierre Elliott Trudeau brought them in the first place. So it was in the 60s when they first started talking about it. Of course, then as now, they did a big commission to look into it. And then they, 1966, they introduced the bill. 1970, it made it into law. And then, I mean, the section numbers were different, but it was the same wording as we have now. The section numbers have just moved around a bit from adding new laws and whatnot. So the law as we know it has existed since 1970. Wow. And that's the Advocating Genocide 318, the public incitement of hatred, 319, well, I guess inciting hatred to breach of public peace, that's 319 sub 1, and then willful promotion of hatred, 319 sub 2. So I mean, this is, it's been on the books since 1970, but they didn't. I mean, and they did use it. I mean, the Zundel case. I mean, when we were talking about that, I mean, that was back in the 80s.
That was going to be my next question, which is how many times has this actually been used against Canadian citizens for their speech? And I guess there's a difference of them being charged and them being successfully charged, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, people get charged with things all the time. How many times? I mean, it's hard to say because there could be cases that were never considered a big enough deal to be reported. But I suspect that pretty much every time they've used it, it's been reported. And I don't mean just in the media. I mean reported as in reported in the law reports, which is where lawyers that can find cases. So the earliest one I could find was 1979. That was Bazanga and DeRoche. So that was actually where it was hatred directed towards the French Canadian community. Although that guy was acquitted because the Ontario Court of Appeal found that it was not clear if the person had willfully promoted hatred, because it was one where they were having a debate in like some municipal politics and got really heated. And then, one guy got all upset and circulated some pamphlet containing anti-French Canadian stuff. And, anyway, so and then of course there's so that was 1979. Then of course 1990 you've got the Keegstra case. I mean, that's one of the big well-known ones. That's he was was it British Columbia? I think anyway, he was a public school teacher, and he was teaching his students like basically, hey, 6 million didn't die in the gas chambers, or I things of that nature. I actually don't remember exactly what he was saying. I just know he was a social studies teacher. He was teaching stuff, that, and then he was charged. Now that was the first one where the constitutionality of the laws really got challenged, and even back then, 1990, the Supreme Court said, no, it doesn't infringe the charter. Well, the majority of them said it didn't even infringe the charter. Justice McLaughlin, who later became the Chief Justice, but she wasn't at that time, she said it did infringe the charter, but it was justified under Section 1, which...
what does that mean?
Just briefly on Section 1, lots of people say to me, oh, our Constitution is flawed because of Section 1. These rights should be unlimited. I don't agree with that, because if you had, say, freedom of religion, if you had unlimited freedom of religion, that would mean that if there were some people who worship the sun god, they could kidnap people off the street, murder them, cut their heart out, and offer it to the sun god. And then they could say, well, we should be acquitted, or your murder laws are unconstitutional because it violates our religious freedom. And if you didn't have Section 1, then the court would be forced to say, yeah, you're right, you're free to go, please murder some more people and cut their hearts out. So it's a bit of an extreme example, but that's the type of situations that you need a Section 1 for. But unfortunately, as I've said often, not my phrase, I got it from Mark Stein, but politics are downstream from culture, and the law is downstream from the politics. So really it comes back to the culture. I think that's the key one. And our culture is accepting of these are the exceptions that our culture wants. And judges, they come from our culture. They live here. They're Canadians, right? So not to go through, but look, it hasn't. I'd say at a quick, like maybe a dozen times. It's been used. Hasn't been used a lot. I mean, there was another one. I know David Henneque. That was one where an Indigenous chief was charged. Now his quote, I don't know if you remember that case, or maybe you're not old enough to remember it. He was getting interviewed, and he was getting really pushed by reporters about his views on the Holocaust, and he said something like, well, the Jews were destroying Germany, so Hitler had to fry those guys. Like that was essentially his quote. I remember he said Hitler had to fry those guys was part of his quote. Now he was acquitted though because they said it wasn't willful because he just kind of blurted this out of frustration of being really pestered by these reporters. But I've always thought that would be a fantastic case to use as a precedent to say that that a lot of these comments aren't hate crime, because it was partly they blurted out, but they also said it didn't meet that test that I talked about in episode 16. So the court, I have some of the comments here. They said his remarks were revolting, disgusting, and untrue, but they did not constitute promoting hatred. So when you've got precedents like that, that's why I think I would love to do a case where the argument is, look, this doesn't meet the test of hate crime, rather than it wasn't me, or I wasn't talking about them, I was talking about someone else.
Interesting. So you would attack it on the grounds of it not being hate speech, I guess. I guess I'm kind of like the willful promotion of what's the one with the lowest threshold? Willful promotion?
Yeah, willful promotion of hatred.
Right. That's interesting. Did you happen to see the video that I posted today about it was a song about
I did. Let's I know Richard's got it queued up, he's been waiting for it, because for educational and academic purposes, we'll play it, and then we'll talk about whether that might run afoul of hate crime laws.
Perfect.
You would not believe your eyes. 10,000 Indian guys lining up for a job at Tim Hortons. Stink lines are in the air. They're pooping everywhere. It smells so bad that I fall asleep. I'd like to make myself believe that we're not being but every time I turn around, I can hardly see many people out that look like me.
All right.
What's gonna happen? What's gonna happen, sir? Am I in trouble or what?
Well, I mean, so let's take the section piece by piece. So first, they have to prove that there's an identifiable group. I think clearly, and by identifiable group, they say people distinguished by color, race, religion, national or ethnic origin. So they could probably say, yeah, they've proved that there's the video is.
There is an Indian flag. I explicitly put an Indian flag in it.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean the Indian flag is there, but again, let's look at the the definition of hatred. So I've actually got episode 16. I'm not gonna play it. I'm just gonna share the screen.
Is there what's the sort of excuse? Is there an excuse based in for like it's part of a comedy bit? It was satire.
Yeah, well, that would be, I mean, yeah, that would be part of it, and that's where we get to the definition here. So I've got what the courts have said. So they said hatred is not a word of casual connotation. To promote hatred is to instill detestation, enmity, ill will, and malevolence in another. I think the use of that "and" is important because it's showing, so it's clearly an expression must go a long way before it qualifies within the definition of 319 sub 2. In 319 sub 2, that is the most permissive one that we've been talking about. So, I mean, I think the fact that it's satire and it's clearly a comedy video. It's not meant to be taken seriously. A comedy video is not going to instill that detestation, enmity, ill will, and malevolence. That's where I don't think it meets the test. And to this point, I actually haven't seen anyone doing a comedy bit that's been charged with any hate speech. So I think that's also something that, like, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
super concerned that you'd be charged. I mean, anything's possible nowadays, but you can see, like, just putting that definition up there, you can see how strong the speech has to be. I mean, it's not just making fun of people, it's not just insulting people, it's, you know, you're just stirring up malevolence and like this real deep hatred for people. And your video isn't doing that.
Okay, so they wouldn't have a strong argument with existing speech laws. Based on what you know about the Online Harms Act and Bill C-63, would they have a stronger argument to charge me with something for that video, do you think?
There's nothing in the wording of the online hates bill that would, or the online, or
Harms
the,
Act.
what is it? Yeah, the Online Harms Act. There's nothing in the wording of the Online Harms Act that would give them anything extra or above and beyond what they already have. So, in that respect, I don't think you'd be at any additional risk. The problem is probably more, you know, how does the passage of that act influence the culture and push it to a point where it's now acceptable to prosecute someone for that. So let me just quickly, Franklin Davey just made a comment here. I mean, I think it's worth reminding ourselves of this one too. You know, what happened to the unvaccinated sounds a lot like what you're speaking of. I mean, let's just have a look here at the, you know, the the infamous Toronto Star headline, right? You know, if an unvaccinated person catches it from someone who's vaccinated, boohoo, too bad. I have no empathy left for the unvaccinated. Let them die. I honestly don't care if they die from COVID, not even a little bit. Yeah, like, I mean, I would say that's a lot closer to the line of hatred, except, of course, where people are saved on that one and why they wouldn't get charged is unvaccinated people are not an identifiable group as defined by the section in question, because identifiable group, it has to be gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, and medical status is not included as in making you an identifiable group. So I mean, that would be number one why no one was charged. I mean, another piece of why they're never charged, of course, is because, again, the culture, the prevailing culture was, no, screw these people. They don't have rights.
Let's talk about another side of this, which is, you know, and it's a much more cynical, or maybe you could say realist sort of perspective on free speech in Canada. I've talked about this on my channel before, but Aaron Gunn he's now a Conservative Party candidate, and he's made some of these documentaries on YouTube. And some of them are really good. They're really well done. You know, he talks about sort of the 10 cities and all the drug use in Vancouver, for example. And he also made one called The End of Free Speech in Canada, something like this, The End of Free Speech in Canada. And in it, he talks about just speech laws, the laws of people violating speech laws and getting in trouble. But the thing is, this was after the trucker convoy. And like, he didn't mention anything about free speech in regards to the trucker convoy. And I thought that was very interesting because from my perspective, it's like certain people got targeted because they were leaders or more prominent figures in this protest movement that clearly had a very specific belief system or ideas of opposing the government mandates. And it just kind of feels like they had trumped up charges. They weren't speech charges, but they were criminal charges. And for me, it's like, well, that clearly happened because of their political opinion. That's why they got charged. So I thought it was like such an incomplete perception of free speech in Canada. If you're not going to talk about the people who are being dragged through the court systems for not wanting to, for opposing mandates, what are your thoughts on that sort of perspective on things of, like, aside from speech laws, but just like the actual sort of application of criminal law towards people that maybe the government doesn't really like that much?
Well, it's a huge problem, I think, for the government to be criminalizing people that they don't agree with. Let me put it's certainly not freedom and democracy. It might be something else. I guess I shouldn't say in principle Could there never be a circumstance where the government should go after people? I mean, I'm hesitant to say that because I'm not sure that it was necessarily that much of a bad thing when, say, for example, Senator McCarthy went after communists in the United States. But it's certainly not freedom and democracy. I mean, it's hypocritical. We say, oh, we're such a free and democratic society. Well, we're not. But, you know, it all comes back to having the right principles, I think, is also the key. So, yeah, it's a very, you know, that's a difficult and nuanced thing. All I can say is the laws that, you know, when I look at the law in our books and the charter that we have written, these things are clearly not consistent with that, and it's not consistent with how we, you know, present our country as this beacon of freedom and democracy. Well, I think in 2024, freedom and democracy basically doesn't mean anything anymore, because it's not just Canada; it's everywhere where this stuff is going on. I mean, in Germany, and again, you talk about looking at other countries to see what's going on there. Germany, for example, I mean, Alternative for Deutschland looks like they're poised to maybe even win the next election. So they're scrambling to outlaw that party because they don't accept their views, even though their views are clearly popular. I mean, that's why they're polling so well. So, you know, if you actually believe in democracy, then, well, isn't that the will of the people? But, you know, that's why I say democracy doesn't even mean any, if it ever did mean anything. And was anything other than a slogan, which I'm not sure that it was, because I would argue that like medieval peasants had more democracy than we have in terms of like actual like local. No, I'm not joking. Like literally, they did in terms of self-determination and being able to just live your life free without the government telling you what to do, and being able to. I mean, democracy in terms of self-determination. I would say they had more self-determination on a lot of topics than we do. And I guarantee you, no one went to jail for saying mean things about other people. Now, I mean, that raises the whole Inquisition thing, which I've been meaning to do a show on that, because the Inquisition is actually fascinating. And most people don't know this, but a lot of our procedures and the most fair procedures actually come from the Inquisition. And the Inquisition had all kinds of fascinating things. Like even after someone was convicted, they wouldn't carry out the sentence for a whole year, and they would, every month or so, they would re-question the witnesses to make sure they didn't change their evidence, to make sure this was 100% legit, that the person actually said that. And you know, they would go to the person to see, like, you know, are you going to repent of this? And you'd always get, you know, it's a different thing though, because, you know, that's within the religious realm. It's not a civil thing.
Right,
and I think the religious realm is different because it only applied to people who professed themselves as Catholics, contrary to what a lot of the propaganda says. Like Jews, Muslims, non-Christians, the Inquisition had nothing to do with them. I think religions have the right to police their own belief systems, because otherwise you get the insanity that you see today, where, you know, they're all changing what they've believed forever. You know, it's... Anyway, that's getting that's a rabbit hole maybe to go down another time, but you know, it is a fascinating thing when you you know, I've studied some history on that. But that said, for the reasons that we started early, we're getting to the point where we're going to have to wrap this up. So I will give you, you know, a couple minutes if there's something else you wanted to add to the conversation we've had so far before I wrap it up.
Yeah, I just had a few thoughts of, you know, you were bringing up the speech laws and how back in the day it was used in a way of like, hey, you're saying mean things about the French. You're saying mean things about the Quebecois or whatever it might have been. And it's interesting that the same law exists today. And that's almost like an absurd idea that the French would be like, you know, the identifiable group that would be treated as the victim. And I guess I bring that up because I think the most concerning thing about implementing something like the Online Harms Act is the fact of the matter that it creates a bigger toolkit to be used by the state or by the citizens to use against one another. And you never know what things might look like down the road. And you never know how it might be used or weaponized. And like what creeps me out is how, sure, they have some of these words defined somewhat, but it's almost like the definitions of words change as things go on. You know, like it's very interesting. This is like a whole rabbit hole, so we don't have to dwell on it too long. But from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That was called by some people. That's a call to genocide. It's like, so a call for freedom is a call for genocide. So it's like, okay, so that equals this. And it's like, it's just spooky to imagine how that could be used and how definitions could be changed in the future. For example, even in the definition of detestation and vilification, maybe they just take one little thing here and say, well, actually that's textbook vilification. Like, you never know what kind of precedent could be set culturally in the political environment that could then be used and leveraged into a political charge, or I guess I should say a criminal charge, criminal speech charge.
Yeah, I think those are good points. And yeah, that's why it's always so important for people to pay attention, because a lot of these laws just get passed when no one's paying attention. I mean, and again, the Holocaust denial law, most people don't even know that law passed. Almost no one knows that started out as a Conservative Party of Canada private members bill. So don't fool yourself and think that the Conservative Party has anything to do with being the party of free speech, if that's something that you're concerned about.
I'm totally kicking myself because I saw when that Holocaust denial thing got slipped into the budget. It was like right before, I think, or right during or right after the trucker convoy in 2022. And I meant to do a quick TikTok about it, but I never did. And it was going to be like, hi, I'm your Conservative Party candidate. Are you worried about the cost of living and vaccine mandates? Yeah, that's exactly why we need to talk about the Holocaust. And because it was just so out of left field when this was passed, no one's talking about this at all, but it gets there it is, slipped into the law under criminal hate speech. It's just totally absurd. But you're absolutely right. People need to pay attention.
Yeah, and that's when a lot of this stuff does. And I think I think it should not be permissible to slip things like that into a budget bill. A budget bill should just be about the budget. You shouldn't be able to vary any of the laws, but that's a whole other topic. So Greg, thank you very much for joining us. I forgot to mention this at the beginning. We started early. When I do live streams, I'm not going to be doing them at 8 o'clock because I just get home way too late when I do that. Stay tuned to when we're going to do that. We're not going to have a live stream in January because I've done 3 in December. I'm taking some Christmas holiday time. So we'll be back with the live streams on the first Thursday of every month starting in February. Thanks again, Greg. As always, video is not legal advice. If you need legal advice, call a lawyer. My number and website are on the ticker on the bottom there. And of course, we're always open to suggestions. Suggestions of be they guests, be they topics. Hopefully, Greg, we can get together again because I've greatly enjoyed both of our talks, both last week and this week. And for our viewers, if you found this video at all interesting, helpful, informative, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. I know a lot of people say we're being shadow banned. We have absolutely not been able to break free of 8.5 thousand subscribers for
Go subscribe to Nicholas Wansbutter right now. One of the mods put it in the chat. Make sure you go subscribe to his channel right now. We got to break through the shadow banners.
All right. Thanks a lot, Greg. And have a Merry Christmas, everyone. Because I won't be next Thursday is after Christmas, so have a Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas. And if you want to learn more about what I'm doing, just go to savefreespeech.ca. If you want to support what we're doing to protect free speech, you can donate to our documentary that we're making about persecuted Canadians. So thank you again for having me, Mr. Wansbutter.
My